and we'll get into this. Here's a couple of the enemies of meditation. Trying to have insight. It really is, oddly enough. Like anytime we have ideas, like, oh, wow. That's just distraction. That's just another form. In Sanskrit, it's called prapancha. It's just another type of distraction. It's like, whoa, that's amazing. Something's happening, or all the different levels of insight. Just trivia. Murray used to always say it's just trivia. He had a beautiful English accent, which I can't mimic, but he would say, it's just trivia, old boy, it's just trivia. I'd be like, Murray, something amazing happened in meditation. He's like, it's just trivia, old boy. So it's just letting that go again and again. But yeah.
I like the relaxed permission of it.
Totally, exactly, yeah.
All the different ways that I've learned to meditate. I've never done that practice before,
Yeah.
and I really liked it. Well,
Yeah.
I think that feeling of coming back to the breath.
Yeah.
And then, okay, it's okay to let go.
Totally, just relax, yeah.
The whole relaxation of just being allowed to wander. Nobody ever said that.
Yeah.
All the meditation.
Great,
stuff,
yeah.
all these years, no teacher has ever said it's okay to let your mind wander.
Yeah.
You're supposed to shoot yourself if your mind wanders.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, so I've had many really, really wonderful meditation teachers over the years. And, a couple of times somebody will say something to you that just hits you. And I was studying with a wonderful woman named Marcia Rose, really very accomplished meditator. And she said, we're not trying to focus, and this is such a key point, we're not trying to focus on the breath. And again, there's a quality of, for lack of a better word, masculine or feminine energies, right? Masculine energy, we can say, it's related in kind of Jungian psychology to ascension. It's related to solar energy, spirit, right? So, and again, think about if I said to you, that person is very spirited. Well, you'd have a sense of that person is like able to accomplish things, right? So it's an upward moving energy. And then there's a yin or feminine energy, which is related with lunar cycles, and it's related to calming and soul. So again, think about the difference between spirit and soul, which used to be very articulated, but now we kind of mix them up sometimes. But if I said to you, that person is very spirited, and then if I said, this person is very soulful, feel the difference there, right? The soulful feels like a presencing, right? Who would you want is the CEO? You might want the spirited person to get everybody on board. Who would you want is a therapist, or who would you want is somebody that you could talk to when you're having a hard time? You want that soulful energy. So oftentimes when we hear the instruction, focus on the breath, right? Is that spirit or soul? Tricky. Spirit. Yes, spirit. It's projecting your energy out. Focus on something. And Marcia Rose says, she's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm focusing on the breath, She said, no. She says, receive the sensation of the breath. Notice how different that is. It's like you're relaxing and you're opening up to receiving the sensation, as opposed to trying to do something. It's just a receptive energy. It might sound subtle, but it's really, really potent. So that's, as Cecily was talking, it reminding me of that. We're trying to really just open. Another wonderful, very profound meditation teacher named Shayla Catherine, she said to me once, she says, meditation is not about the accumulation of accomplishment, okay, which normally we think it is in a way. She said, but rather the refinement of relinquishment. Letting go. What I said yesterday, meditation is working on specific cognitive and emotional skills for the purpose of awakening. What is one of those skills? Learning to let go. Right? And we don't think of letting go as a skill, but it really is something we need to cultivate. So we need to make a spirited effort to create a soulful, you see, and there's a paradox here, and this is a paradox you cannot get away from. And the paradox is any attempt to create a non-agitated state of mind is itself an agitated state of mind. Okay, I'm going to say that again because it's like a tongue twister, because it's like, wait, what are you trying to do in meditation? You're trying to become a less agitated person on one level. How do you do that? By letting go of wanting to become a less agitated person. Because really what we're trying to do with meditation is we're trying to become intimate with what's actually happening. And if you've noticed, what actually is happening is oftentimes not very pleasant. Almost every time somebody comes to me and they start to develop a serious interest in meditation, meaning they're doing at least 1 or 2 hours a day, within a couple of weeks, they say, I'm becoming a much worse person. I see it happen over and over. They say, I used to be a really nice, kind person, and now I'm just not. And really what's happening, everybody goes through this. What's really happening is you're just discovering who you actually always were. Right? You're just realizing, oh no, you're realizing how neurotic you actually are. I remember that my first ever 10-day silent retreat, I did a Goenka style. Many of you have probably done it, where you do 10 hours for 10 days. And you're silent the whole time. And I finished, and the first thing I said to my friend was, I said, I need therapy. Because I just realized what a mess I was. You know, I was just a mess. And it wasn't like I wasn't a mess before. I just had enough trivia where I didn't notice how much of a mess I was. So Phyllis and Cecily just brought up a couple points that I want to touch on. Phyllis brought up, she said, well, it was interesting that we started, right? Because I said start on the exhale. So normally when I say take a breath, what do? You go inhale and exhale, right? And I said, let's switch that. And I said that, and Phyllis noticed that was different, right? And why do I do that? Because there's all these points. What happens is anytime we're done something, anytime we're finished with a project, there's a little part of the mind that shuts down. Now, this is going to sound very subtle, but it's very true. When we inhale and exhale, we're done with a project. And that's when you start to become the mind starts to wake up to subtle movements, you realize that's almost always the exact point where the mind goes into mind wandering. At the end of the exhale. After a long time of practice, you can start to see exactly what point the mind moves off the object and goes into mind wandering. It's 97% at that point, at the end of the exhale, which is so interesting. So the way the reason we reverse that is because then we normally don't think of the inhale as the end of a project. Do you see what I mean? I'm trying to do some writing right now, and I was reading Faulkner, who's his thoughts on writing, he says never finish writing when you're finished with what you need to say for that day. Always finish right before you're finished with what you need to say. In other words, know exactly what the next sentence is you want to write, and finish before you write that next sentence. Because then when the next morning you're excited to write that sentence which you wanted to write last night. You see what I mean? But if I write that next sentence and I'm like, okay, I'm done with that section, the next day, and I've tried this, it's so true, you're like, I don't really know what comes next. I'll get to that. I'll do that later today. And then like 7 weeks later, you're like, I got to get to that next sentence. And I do that with construction now too. There's always construction on the farm. So if I get to a point, like if I'm getting close to a point of like, I don't know how to proceed, I always make sure to stop before that. So I was like, well, I just have to cut this 2x4 and then nail that in, and it just gets you going. So it's a similar thing in practice. When we exhale and inhale, we're like, we want to exhale, like we're going to stay present. It sounds very subtle, but it's not. It really becomes quite useful. So then we exhale. So again, what are we talking about? We're talking about the ways we count the breath when we're working with counting the breath. So inhale, so exhale, inhale 1. Exhale, inhale 2, like that. Now Cecily brought up something, 2 points. Well, one, she says when she was just, and correct me if I don't have this right, but she said when she was relaxing, there was just a joy coming up. Because that's where she's at right now. But she says if there was grief, like the grief might arise, you know? And so yes, this whole practice that we're talking about as a more yin feminine approach of receptivity is just allowing whatever's present. But there's a difference between that and engaging it. You see, we're just allowing, but we're not engaging it. We're not touching it. And there's a place and there's practices for engaging and touching. But in this, we're just allowing, we're not paying much attention to the emotional states that are rising and falling. This is very tricky when you start to get into some more states that create ecstasy. And we'll talk about that a little bit when we look at the levels. But because we feel like that's the goal of practice somehow, it's not. But when we start to move into these states that create ecstasy, there's a feeling of wanting to engage that. There's this feeling of like, I've made it, I've succeeded. I've even had the delusional thought of, I'm fully awakened. It doesn't take long. All you have to do is go hang out with your family and you realize, oh, that was not the case. But, you know, when those ecstatic states come and they just start flushing through you, you know, for days, you feel like something. And then again, I just remember Murray's voice in my head. It's all trivia, old boy. It's all trivia, you know. You just let that go too. He was mentioning the Advaita Vedanta slogan, neti neti, which means not this, not that. And you just notice the mind always wanting to grab something. Yeah, anything else from that little practice we did? Yeah.
So I found myself getting annoyed by all the little sounds that were around.
Great, yeah.
And I was trying to not think about it, but the more I tried to not think about it,
Yeah.
I was thinking about it.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. Yeah, sounds are wonderful, and it was such a great environment for this morning's meditation. I teach a weekly class in my hometown when I'm there, and I encourage people to not turn off their cell phones, just so we can relax. Somebody's phone is ringing, and there's this weird thing about allowing things to, not having to feel like you have to have a commentary about it. So here we had but I do appreciate Mark fixing it, but we had the rattling light.
Oh, it'll come back.
And we had, you know, little phone activity and, you know, rustling. And there was a wonderful rascal of a meditation teacher named Chogyam Trungpa. And he used to, when he would guide meditations, he would ask one of his students to vacuum in the hallway. And he instructed him to continually hit the wall where on the other side people were meditating. Just to hit that point of like irritability, you know, and really that's what we're working so much with, that irritability. And it took me a long time to actually hit this point of letting go. But I did a 10-day meditation retreat, this one I was telling you about, where it's 10 hours a day, it's the Goenka style. And there's this kid in front of me, and you have little name tags, but you're silent the whole time. And you have little name tags. So I knew his name was Scotty. And the whole time he was cracking his knuckles. And I don't mean like once every 30 minutes. I mean like once every 15 minutes for 10 hours a day for 10 days. And so in my mind, I called him Scotty Knuckles, you know? And so I went up to the teacher, and I knew they were going to pull this stunt of like, you know, he's your practice. So I didn't want to like deal with that. So I said, hey, I need to switch seats, you know? And they're like, oh, why? I'm like, it's hard to explain. Just let me switch seats, you know. And I said, because this guy's cracking his knuckles. They said, he is your practice. And I was like, I knew you were going to say that. I didn't take 10 days out of my life, my busy life, to work with Scotty, you know. I would have called him and gone to couples therapy or something. But I came here to have a little peace and quiet, you know. But it was really one of the greatest gifts, because I finally got to a place where I could let that be, and I realized I don't have to have a commentary. But I had 9 days of angry commentary. Why is he here? Like, what, you know, it's just so frustrated. And then I started having, like, I wanted to slash his tires. And, you know, I mean, it got dark. I was just, like, so frustrated. And then I realized I can let Scotty be who he is. I don't have to have a commentary. And that was life-saving when I got into a 3-year retreat, that little lesson. And not to say it doesn't come up again, but I just remember, oh, I actually don't have to comment on this. Let me give you, because it's a really important point, let me give you one more angle on that same point. My partner and I walk every morning, and sometimes we're at the farm, and sometimes we're in town. So when we're in town, we walk in neighborhoods. And one morning we were walking, and we noticed we were commenting on every single house. And we're like, oh, I love that fence. And I was like, I don't know about the color of those shutters. And then it's like, wow, I don't know, I wouldn't have put the tree there. You know, and at one point we're like, wow, do we have to comment on everything? You know, do we have to have an opinion about, and we just together, we decided, let's just stop the opinion generating machine for the rest of the walk. And it's a similar energy. Again, it's not bad to have opinions, and especially if you're a designer, you want to constantly be exercising that. But you want to be able to turn it off when you need to. Yeah.
And I'm thinking how wonderful it is that we can all do that, and the grace for me would be when I wake up and know I'm doing it.
Yeah, that's the key, yeah, right.
And then I have the space to choose to go on doing it, mostly what I think is, I just think I'm ridiculously funny.
Yeah,
I laugh.
right, yeah.
Look at me doing that. But then I have a choice.
Yeah, no, and that's the key thing. What we're trying to do is we're not trying to change anything. We're just trying to become aware of what's actually happening. Yeah.
Do you mind if I kind of flip the brain on it?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
I think the brain gets a bad rap.
Of course.
Somewhere along the line.
Yeah.
In meditation, because we talk about how it's always wandering off. Right? So you said exhale, inhale, at that pause, the mind goes and wanders off.
Yeah.
Normally. It just dawned on me that maybe because the mind knows there's something else it would like to get out of this breathing cycle
Yeah.
and get to.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Like, we're not in this breathing cycle until we're in it. And we're in it.
Yeah.
And stuck, kind of, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And every time we pause that breathing cycle, the brain's like, oh, thank God, let me get to what's really important.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And we're like, no, stay here and exhale again.
Yeah.
You know, and the brain's like, oh my God, how long are we going to do this?
Yeah.
You don't know what's on the other side. I'm trying to get us there.
Yeah,
And you keep me pinned here in this breathing cycle,
totally.
you know?
Yeah, and especially in Fairfield County. We need to get to the other, we got something to get to, you know? And and that's what's so frustrating for the mind is that there's like, I'm trying to get somewhere. There's a really, on that exact same point, there's an interesting eating exercise where you eat mindfully and slowly. Like you might take 60 seconds per bite. When I was 16, I started going to Zen Mountain Monastery in upstate New York with a really wonderful Roshi, John Dado Lori, if anybody knows him. A very strict monastery, and I'm 16, but you have to eat like this, you know? And it was like, but what I noticed, something very interesting, and I called it the gap of forgetting, right? So here's what happens, and I love eating, like it's a big, I'm not unique in that, but I happen to really love it. So I'm always so excited for mealtime, and then let's say I have a fork full of like the most exciting bite. Right? So here I am, I'm bringing up the fork, I'm about to make contact with this thing that I want to make contact with, okay? And then right when it hits, it's inevitable that I'm gonna make contact, what I discovered is the mind flies off and starts thinking about the next bite. Which is fascinating because it means I'm actually never making contact with the thing that I'm wanting to make contact with. I'm living my life as an anticipation machine. I'm never actually in the moment that I want to be in. Dr. Matt Killingsworth from Harvard did some really interesting studies on mind wandering, and he found people mind wander even in sex. Maybe not, that's not surprising, but even in sex they want to be in. Even in exciting sex, or even in eating, all these pleasurable activities, people mind wander for exactly this reason, because there's a part of the mind that's like, okay, let me get to the next thing. And we have such a hard time actually settling into it. Once you settle into the breath, you realize that a simple sensation like the breath is so utterly fulfilling. So it's this game. And now to your other point of that the mind gets a bad rap, there is a place for mind wandering. And I do active mind wandering every day at the farm. It's one of my daily practices. And it's actually an old Tibetan practice called sky gazing. But I literally lay down in the grass in my backyard and I just watch the sky and I mind wander. And some really interesting studies have come out on showing how healthy that is for the mind. Now, notice that's a different quality than waking up at 3 in the morning and thinking I have prostate cancer. Because that's also mind wandering, but I'm being captured by a perseverating thought, which leads to another perseverating thought, and you see, and I get pulled in, I'm getting captured. As opposed to this kind of spacious, just letting the mind wander. And this comes back to what Cecily was saying of being aware of it happening, as opposed to it being captured by it. Yeah.
I was able to give myself a lot of grace in meditating by that attitude, like recognizing when the mind wanders, that's the practice.
Yeah.
I heard that somewhere.
Yeah.
And when I realized that the mind's job is to think,
Yeah.
it's okay if it thinks,
Yeah.
and then my practice improved
Yeah.
because it wasn't fighting.
Great. Yeah, you were just, and what you were doing was you were labeling what was happening. You're like, oh, there's the mind thinking.
The mind's just thinking.
Yeah.
That's what the mind does.
Yeah.
I recognized it.
Yeah, right, exactly. So there's another practice called Mahasi noting practice, and that's the essence of it, is you're not trying to control. Again, we're not trying to control practice, but you're noting it by labeling. And you'll just be like, oh, thinking mind, craving mind, averse mind. You just note those things. Another noting practice is you note whether your mind is in the past or the future. And it can just be a nice way of just not engaging it, but acknowledging it. And you're not saying, past, get back here. And you're not saying, future, get back here. You're just noting, oh, mind in the past. Mind in the future.
Could I insert
Yeah,
the word
yeah.
compassion?
Yeah, right. Self-compassion, yeah.
Just that, when I notice that I'm all over the place in my head, and I'm aware of that, I have a couple of choices. One is I'm bad.
Yeah,
You know, as you said.
totally, yeah.
Or I can just smile at myself compassionately
Yeah, yeah,
and let it go.
yeah. Yeah, and then when you realize that that's just the nature of mind, too, to do that, then you don't even need compassion because there's nothing to be, or forgiveness, because there's nothing to forgive because the mind is just doing what the mind does. Like you wouldn't forgive a puppy for being rambunctious. You see what I mean? You're not like, okay, I'm going to have compassion for you little puppy. You're like, no, you're like, the puppy is being puppiness, right? But self-forgiveness is such a huge aspect of practice. And I just recently worked with a group of 30 tech entrepreneurs. These are all kids that are just building, the latest apps and stuff. And it was amazing. Almost all of them are struggling. I worked with each one of them individually to figure out what practice to do. And I would say most of them I had on a self-forgiveness practice. They were plagued with, and these kids were making huge amounts of money. I mean, ungodly amounts of money. They were highly successful in that regard. And they just hated themselves, and it was just like, just stop beating yourself up, like learning self-forgiveness. And that's a beautiful type of practice.